This is Gabi with Breaking Bio. Here I am interviewing Dr. Michelle Rodrigues, who is doing a fantastic postdoc with the Laboratory of Evolutionary Endocrinology, hopefully I got that right, yes, and the Beekeepers Institute at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So she's doing really interesting work with social support and stress in female scientists, but also has a background in other primates as well. So, did I get your whole introduction?
Yes, you got it all right.
Cool. Very cool. So I'd like to kind of start asking you a little bit about what you do currently. So can you talk a little bit about your postdoc working on projects to do with social support and stress in female scientists? Because that sounds really interesting and really applicable to this channel.
Yeah, so basically there's two components to it. I have one group of women of color scientists and then one group of white female scientists.
Very cool.
Both of them, what I'm looking at is their day-to-day experiences, including daily negative workplace experiences, kind of low-level rude interactions, as well as their positive interactions in the form of social support with friends, partners, family. And so basically what my participants do is I give them a whole bag of cups and materials to collect daily urine samples. So every morning for about 1 month, either one menstrual cycle or if they're not regularly cycling, 40 days, they pee in a cup. There are some tubes of urine popsicles in their freezer and record daily information. There's basically a bunch of surveys embedded in one page that has stuff like sleep, mood, those daily workplace experiences that are negative, as well as what kinds of social interactions we have that day.
Very interesting. So did you see any cool results between the two different groups or anything surprising?
So I haven't had the chance to analyze all of it yet. Right now I have about 10 of the women of color. I've assayed their urine samples as well as analyzed their data. So I have preliminary data from them, but I'm still working on running the rest of the hormone assay.
Cool. So what's your hypothesis for your results for this?
So I'm hypothesizing that those daily negative workplace interactions are going to increase cortisol concentrations, but having good social support is going to buffer that effect.
Very cool. Well, that's going to be a really interesting result, I think, for all of us. And it would be really cool to be able to see, kind of like quantitatively what those effects are, because I think, anecdotally, a lot of women in science, especially women of color in science, can speak to those effects, but actually being able to see it in the markers will be really, really rewarding, I think. Well, not rewarding, rewarding to be able to see the results.
Validating.
Exactly. Great. So what are some of the barriers that you faced in your own career in biological anthropology, and how did you overcome them?
So I think a good way of explaining this is actually talk about some of the preliminary qualitative data we did for this project. Before we started the quantitative phase, we did focus groups. One of the big findings, in some ways is very intuitive, but it's really great to see this data. Basically, women were reporting that when they're experiencing a lot of those negative workplace experiences, it causes them to question whether it's because of something they're doing or their quality as a scientist, or whether it's, okay, I'm experiencing racism or sexism or some intersection.
Right.
And I think that really reflects a lot of the feelings I've had where, you're not sure. And one of the cool things that we found is that social support really helps you interpret that. So especially if you have social support from other women of color who are experiencing the same things, and they can kind of reassure you, what, I'm experiencing the same thing. It's not.
That's kind of good to know that there's tools out there to help buffer against that. I think that's really great. Do you think in the academy, do you think there's enough support? Like, do you think people know how to reach out to each other to build those networks? Because I know that when I was going through like undergrad and grad school, it's like, yes, we kind of all knew that we were supposed to be getting support, but we didn't really know how to make that happen.
Yeah, I think this is the challenge. And I think part of the problem with grad school is it just ends up being so isolating.
Sure.
Like even if you start off with a cohort and you have that support, if you're all kind of at different rates in different projects, going to the field at different times, by the end, you're all ending up very isolated.
Right.
And definitely, that was my experience. I think the hard part is that you have to make sure that you build and maintain those social support networks. And for me right now, a big way that I'm doing that is not in person, but via social. So like that's another thing I really like about Twitter, and probably why I'm on Twitter so much, is it's been a way to both develop and maintain existing social support networks that I'm not necessarily getting in person.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, there's been more and more of a scicomm kind of community that's been out on Twitter, which I think is fantastic. Another thing in grad school I noticed is that although we all know the kind of like watch our own mental health and make sure that we're all okay, it's kind of a thing that nobody talks about. Are you getting a sense that that's becoming more open, or is that still a challenge?
So I think it's becoming more open, but it's hard to tell because I feel like the conversations I have, especially with friends that I went to grad school with, we're talking a lot more openly about it now. But it's hard for me to really know if that's part of a culture change, or it's becoming more accepted and more open, or it's just now we have enough distance from some of those experiences we had in grad school that now we can talk about them.
Right.
So for me, it's really hard to separate those two things out.
Yeah, that's really tricky to kind of figure out. So you've worked in a lot of different places, right? So you've worked in the US, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Cameroon. What is some of the most expected discoveries that you've made in the field, or some of the most interesting experiences that you've had working in field work?
So definitely my most unexpected and exciting discovery was during my master's research. A colleague and I both independently at different times observed spider monkeys using people.
That's
And
really
so
cool.
I
Wow.
only had one observation. She had two observations, but what I got to see was this juvenile spider monkey basically breaking off this little branch and chewing the edges of it, and then using those frayed chewed ends to scratch her butt and her underside of her tail.
Amazing. So did people know that spider monkeys use tools before, or is that kind of something new?
It's new. There are some previous observations of behaviors that I think could be classified as tool
Mm-hmm.
use, such as leaf rubbing and using sticks to throw at humans or
Right.
predators. Mostly, I think it's in throwing sticks at human observers,
Right.
but those are kind of ambiguous whether they've been interpreted as tool use or not. So we kind of have the first definitive observations of tool use, and yet
Exciting.
thus far I haven't observed it again. No one else we've talked to reported this in the wild, but it was just really lucky and really exciting to see.
That's really cool. So you're obviously really passionate about primates. Have you always been passionate about primates, or is that something like what kind of got you into work in primatology and biological anthropology?
So I guess I wasn't really into primates until college. I was always really interested in animals and animal behavior.
Right.
You know, like there was like a cheetah phase and a dolphin phase and a humpback whale phase. But a couple of different things got me into primate. One
Mm-hmm.
was I was taking an animals and ethics class in
Mm-hmm.
college. And so much of it focused on like philosophers' assumptions of what animals do or think,
Right.
which drive me crazy because I was, taking these bio and psych classes, and I'm like, no, there is data on this. We can study this or
Mm-hmm.
try and find ways to study it. And so that got me really interested in cognition.
Very
But
cool.
around the same time, I started reading Jane Goodall books, which super exciting. And then I had a summer that I was working at an animal shelter. We had
Mm-hmm.
this animal education day. And so we got to take the day camp kids to the zoo. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized I was trying to keep them in the primate section as long as possible every time. And I was
Right.
kind of like, I just want to stay here and watch the primates and not do anything else.
So you were like, yep, I'm really into primates.
Yeah.
Very cool. So just kind of the connection between non non-human primates and humans. Have you seen any similarities in terms of cognition? Like, I know there must be some, but I guess like where is the overlap between kind of what you're doing now versus what you have been doing in the past?
So I would say the overlap, like there's obviously overlap in cognition, but I think the big overlap is we're these social animals, and we work in the same ways. And kind of the connection between my current work and my previous work is my dissertation was looking at female social relationships as a way to buffer stress in female spider monkeys. And so female spider monkeys, they leave their natal group at adolescence or adulthood, and they have to immigrate into this new community where they're presumably unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
There may be some relatives, but they're mostly in a group of strangers. And right. It's also, they have fission fusion social organization where they split off into smaller groups. When resources are low, it's easier for females to go off in a smaller group or by themselves to forage, right. So they have to have competition. So basically the selective environment's kind of favoring them being off by themselves rather than with other individuals.
Yeah.
So I was interested in, are there still advantages in that sort of setting for them to socialize?
And did you find that buffered stress when they were in their small groups and had relationships?
So what I found is that females basically have these selective close associations where they're tending to travel around with the same females every time. Those are the females they're interacting with. And right after they receive aggression or when their glucocorticoids, when their feces are high, they're affiliating at higher rates.
Huh, interesting. That's really fascinating. Yeah, very cool. So I can kind of see how that feeds back.
Sorry?
I can kind of see how that feeds back into the work you're doing right now. There's a lot of similarities with that. That's cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of just looking at female friendship in different ways. But I think the overarching similarities is that for all social primates, we need that social support, and we have our different ways of seeking it out. And I think the challenge in studying it is we need people, or for monkeys, they need other monkeys to provide that social support, but other people and other monkeys are also assigned, like, they can be risky, they can be aggressive to you, whether it's actually chasing monkeys or in making these rude comments that cut you down at work. And so it's a matter of finding your supportive people while avoiding the people that aren't supportive or causing you problems.
Right, so it's kind of trying to chase the benefits while mitigating any of the bad stuff that could happen as well by trying to do that. Yeah. That's pretty cool. So you've done a lot of science communication, as we've been kind of chatting about before, such as Primatweeps, which I've been following, which is really interesting, and other initiatives as well on Twitter. So I know that obviously publications are really important to us as scientists. It's important to be out in the literature. But what is the role of science communication in all this, especially to lay people? And how do we make science more accessible so it's not just people who are already in the field who are being exposed to it?
So I think there's two components to science communication. One is it's the application of the science. And it's, you need to get the information of here's what we actually studied and found out of our peer review journals and into the hands of people where they can make a difference, whether it's things that people can change their day-to-day lives or if it's policymakers. And so there's that aspect. And then there's a second aspect, just like, this science is cool and I want everyone to learn about it and be as excited as I am.
Very cool.
Sometimes those overlap, but I think both of those are important components.
Yeah, and I think that's an entirely different skill set, is being able to like distill really complex research in a way that is really accessible to people. I know that like I almost have a tendency to talk in jargon sometimes, and then I like catch myself and I'm like, oh wait, like I need to like actually say what I mean to say rather than just kind of using abbreviations and things like that. So it can be quite tricky. But things like Primatweeps, I mean, it is, like you said, science is really cool, and getting people excited that there are these animals out there and they're fascinating, they're doing fascinating things. I think it's really awesome. So I constantly talk about science Twitter to everyone I meet because I think it's a great resource out there. Do you ever talk to schools or tie into kind of education through that way, or?
Yeah, I haven't done any very recently, but a couple years ago I was doing a lot more where there's I do some science outreach things where we just go into a school for a couple hours and talk about social networks, or cool. Science night where we'd have phones set up and we'd play some like game theory games. Awesome. I also as one of my postdoc projects was working with adolescent girls who were in a science camp where they do basically camp for a week every summer.
Very cool. So I'm a big video game fan. So in terms of game theory, do you find that, just for my own interest, do you find that interactive methodologies like playing games or doing skits or something like that is more effective in conveying information than kind of rote learning, or do you think it's important to have a mixture of both, or where do you kind of fall on the divide there?
I mean, I think there's obviously a mixture is good for getting information in different ways, but people have fun with games and primates learn through play.
Right.
I remember there was this one, the science night, where we were playing this game theory game where they were like, they could play this hawk dove game, and then the best out of 3 would get candy. We had a couple of kids that kept on coming back for more. And part of it's the candy, part of it was because they were really having fun.
Right.
It ended up running into the parents of one of those kids a couple weekends after, and like their parents were just like, they loved it so much, they kept on talking about how much fun they had and how they want to go to more science night.
That's awesome.
It's that sticks with you in a way that, like, other forms of education aren't going. When you have fun, it makes you excited and it makes you remember things better.
Right. And I think it also breaks down the stereotypes of science as something that's very like dry and esoteric and inaccessible, and maybe not the most fun. So kind of being able to make science fun and to show science, yes, I mean, it's important to have like rigorous methodology, right? But it's also really interesting. And the difference between just kind of learning something, just kind of, for example, just like learning that something is this, and then the idea of science is something experiential, right? Like we're answering questions that nobody knows. And I think kids are naturally curious. So just kind of tapping into that curiosity is really, really important. Very cool. So you seem to do a lot of teaching and mentorship work. So how would you support diverse students or diverse people who are just starting to choose a STEM career in terms of kind of making their entry into the career as easy as possible and making sure they have someone to look up to?
I mean, I think it's with mentoring anyone, it's a matter of, making sure that you can be a resource when they need. And also, like, there's this whole discussion of mentoring versus sponsorship.
Right.
I think it's kind of an artificial distinction because a good mentor should do both. But I think some of what the research says is that often people from marginalized groups end up getting shut out of social networks or aren't getting the same sort of opportunities for advancement.
Right.
So making sure that you're really active in connecting students to opportunities, and writing letters of recommendation and things like that are very important. I also think and this is something I struggle with, finding the balance of kind of, speaking honestly about what barriers are,
Right.
but trying not to be too discouraging. And that's the balance that I think is really hard to get, because you want to be honest, but you don't want to scare people away, and I've heard that there's some evidence that suggests that people benefit from, having some warnings of like how, like, challenges you're going to experience and how to deal with those.
Right.
But it's also tough to like talk about it in a way that's, I mean, it's the same, like, you tell undergrads, don't go to grad school, it's horrible. Or you tell them grad school's really tough.
Yeah.
And here are some of the challenges, and here's how we navigate them, but it's still, it may not be the best route for everyone.
Yeah, I always, when I had students, when I was working in Namibia, what I always used to tell them is grad school is really difficult. You shouldn't be scared away if you need that to go where you want to go in your career, but be aware that you might not need it depending on what you want to do. So don't kind of automatically just kind of choose a path. Make sure you do your research. And that way people can kind of find out what's best for them. But I do think we kind of have a tendency sometimes as scientists to be like, grad school is really difficult. And that might like freak some undergrads out. But I think, it's all based on what they want to do. And I think importantly, in conservation, it's important to kind of express that there's many different subfields within conservation. It's not just the academy or, there's so many other roles that you can take that are science or science adjacent. And I think that's cool. I mean, I think that pretty much anyone, like, even if they're a policymaker or something, as long as they have an interest in conservation, they can kind of relate their work to that. So super cool. Well, thank you so much. Anything else you want to chat about your research, or?
I think that's about it.
Got it? Yeah, awesome. We were like just super efficient. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I'm really excited to share this on the channel and have everyone learn about the awesome work you do at Primates. So awesome. I'm also going to link them to the Primatweeps because I think everyone should be following them.
Awesome. We need more followers.
Yay, awesome. Well, wonderful to meet you. Bye.
You too. Bye.